September 1854, New York City. 45 children board a train heading west, ages 4 to 16, dressed in identical clothing provided by the Children's Aid Society. Destination: farms and towns across Michigan. They arrive in Dowagiac, Michigan 3 days later. The children are lined up on a platform. Families inspect them like livestock. By evening, all 45 are placed with families. The organizers call it a success. Over the next 75 years, this scene repeats 200,000 times. Between 1854 and 1929, approximately 200,000 children are transported from East Coast cities to rural America via organized railroad programs. The Children's Aid Society, New York Foundling Hospital, and other charitable organizations coordinate the operation. Official narrative: they were orphans, abandoned children from overcrowded cities sent to loving farm families for better lives. But there's a problem with that story. The math doesn't work, the documentation doesn't support it, and the children's own accounts, when they were finally recorded, tell a very different story. These weren't orphans. Most of them had parents. 200,000 children over 75 years. That's 2,666 children per year, or 222 children per month, every month for 75 years. Where did they come from? New York City population in 1860, 813,000. Approximately 200,000 children under age 16. If 200,000 orphans were removed over 75 years, that means every single child in New York in 1860 would have been an orphan, plus all the children born over the next 69 years. Infant mortality in 1860s was high, around 20%, but that creates orphans at a rate of maybe 4,000 per year in New York. The children's orphan trains removed 2,666 per year. That's 66% of all orphans produced annually. But the Children's Aid Society wasn't the only orphanage. New York had dozens of institutions. If the children's trains took 66% of orphans, what happened to the other 34%? Why did those institutions remain full while the trains kept running? The numbers suggest the children weren't coming from normal orphan production. They were coming from somewhere else. In 2014, the PBS documentary The Orphan Trains interviewed descendants and surviving records. What they found? An estimated 60 to 70% of children on orphan trains had at least one living parent. Not orphans, children removed from families. The criteria for removal were broad: poverty, neglect, parents who couldn't speak English, parents who were deemed morally unfit, Irish or Italian immigrants, families living in tenements. In many cases, parents came home from work to find their children gone, taken by the Children's Aid Society or police with no legal process, no court order, no paperwork, just removed. One documented case from 1872, a mother leaves her 3 children with a neighbor while working a 12-hour factory shift. The neighbor reports the children as unsupervised. By the time the mother returns, all 3 children have been placed on a train to Kansas. She never sees them again. No adoption papers exist, no consent forms, no legal transfer of custody. The children were simply taken and relocated 1,200 miles away. This wasn't charity. This was systematic removal of children from specific populations. Why did the orphan train start in 1854? What changed that year? 1854 is right in the middle of the period historians call the Second Great Migration and the urban boom. Supposedly, cities were growing due to immigration and rural to urban migration. But photographs from the 1850s tell a different story. Cities look empty, wide streets with few people, buildings standing but appearing recently occupied rather than freshly built. And then suddenly, in the 1850s, 1860s, massive waves of immigrants and orphans appear. Records show hundreds of thousands entering cities. Where did they come from? The official story: Ireland, famine; Germany, political unrest; rural America, farm failures. But the population numbers don't match the supposed source populations, and the orphan trains conveniently started the exact same year that this unexplained population surge began. 1854, orphan trains begin. Same year, major cities report sudden overcrowding. Same year, massive asylum construction starts. Same year, architectural boom accelerates. Coincidence? Who were the children taken? Records show clear patterns. Irish and Italian families disproportionately targeted. German families less frequently. English families rarely. Children with foreign-sounding names. Children who spoke languages other than English. Children from tenement districts in specific neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that, in photographs, show architectural features inconsistent with recent immigrant construction. Children's Aid Society founder Charles Loring Brace wrote in 1872, "These children come from a population living in buildings not of their own construction, practicing customs foreign to American values." Not of their own construction. He's saying the families were living in buildings they didn't build. Brace also wrote about the children having unusual physical characteristics, taller than expected, different bone structure, hair textures not matching their supposed ethnic origins. These descriptions were later removed from reprints of his work, but the original 1872 edition, held in Yale's library archives, contains these observations. Why would orphan advocates care about bone structure and height unless they were identifying children based on physical characteristics rather than orphan status? Children arrived in small towns across the Midwest and West. They were displayed on platforms, in churches, in town halls. Prospective families examined them. Advertisements in local newspapers. Orphan train arriving Friday. Good workers available, ages 6 to 16. Good workers, not children needing families, workers. Interviews with descendants reveal the reality. Most adopted children were used as farm labor, worked 12 to 16-hour days, slept in barns or attics, not treated as family members, treated as free labor. No adoption fees, no legal paperwork in most cases, just selection and immediate transfer to farms. Many children never learned their original last names, never saw their siblings again if they were separated. The families who took them weren't charitable, they were getting free labor. The program was functionally child trafficking masked as charity. By 1900, some states began requiring legal adoption paperwork. The orphan trains continued, but with more documentation. That's when another pattern emerges. Post-1900 adoption records show systematic name changes. Children with Irish, Italian, or foreign names were given Anglo-Saxon names. Maria Delgado becomes Mary Smith. Giuseppe Romano becomes Joseph Roberts. Yuri Petrovich becomes George Peters. Standard practice for adoptions? Maybe, but the pattern is specific. Names were anglicized in ways that erased ethnic identity entirely. More concerning, birth records for these children often don't exist. Baptismal records missing. no documentation of their existence before they appear in the orphan train records. It's as if these children materialized in 1850s to 1870s New York with no prior history. Genealogists trying to trace orphan train riders hit dead ends. The children have no birth certificates, no hospital records, no documentation before they appear in the orphanage system. They exist in records starting around ages 4 to 8, but nothing before. Where were they born? Who were their parents? Official records say unknown, but 200,000 children with no documentation, all in the same 75-year period? The orphan train program wasn't one organization. It was coordinated across multiple institutions. Children's Aid Society, Protestant. New York Foundling Hospital, Catholic. Children's Home Society, Boston Children's Mission, plus dozens of smaller charities. These organizations didn't compete. They cooperated, shared lists of children, coordinated train schedules, divided geographic territories. Railroad companies provided free transport. Why? Since when do railroads provide free service for charity? State governments facilitated the program. Governors publicly endorsed it. Legislation exempted the organizations from child labor laws and provided them legal protection from parents trying to reclaim their children. This level of coordination across religious denominations, state borders, private charities, and rail corporations suggests central planning. Who had the authority to coordinate Protestant and Catholic institutions in the 1800s? Who convinced railroads to provide free transport for decades? Who ensured state governments passed protective legislation? This wasn't grassroots charity. This was organized operation with institutional backing. 1929, the orphan trains stop. Not gradually, abruptly. The Children's Aid Society closes the program. The New York Foundling Hospital shuts down its placement operation. Other organizations follow within months. Official reason? Changes in child welfare philosophy. Real reason? States began requiring background checks on receiving families, legal adoption proceedings, and follow-up visits. The informal, take a child, no questions asked system couldn't continue. But here's what's interesting. 1929, the Great Depression starts in October. Before the Depression, in January 1929, the orphan trains end. You'd expect economic collapse to create more orphans, not fewer. If the program was genuinely about helping orphaned children, the Depression should have caused expansion, not termination. Instead, it ends right before an event that would have provided perfect cover for continued operations, unless the purpose of the program was already fulfilled. In the 1970s to 1990s, as orphan train riders reached old age, some spoke publicly for the first time. Their accounts were recorded by oral historians and genealogists. I remember my mother. She didn't abandon me. Men came and took us. We lived in a big house with strange architecture. Then suddenly we were in an orphanage. My siblings and I were split up. I never saw them again. The family that took me said I was lucky, that my real family was gone and I needed to forget them. I remembered my mother speaking a language I didn't understand. When I tried to speak it at the farm, they beat me. These aren't accounts of grateful orphans saved from poverty. These are accounts of children forcibly removed from families and told to forget their origins. One woman, interviewed in 1986 at age 94, said, "I remember towers, big buildings with copper on top, then fire, then chaos, then men in uniforms taking children away. Towers with copper, buildings burning, uniformed men removing children. This account was recorded, then largely ignored by historians. Here's what they don't want you to connect. The orphan trains operated from 1854 to 1929, the exact same period as the architectural boom and reset 1850 to 1900, mass institutionalization of undesirables in asylums 1850 to 1900, systematic destruction of historical records 1850 to 1920, the Great Fires, Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, 1870 to 1920s, World's Fairs exhibiting, then destroying advanced architecture, 1893 to 1915. Same 75-year window, all connected. The orphan trains weren't American orphans, they were survivors, children of a previous civilization living in those ornate buildings with unusual architecture. When the reset happened, when the fires came, when the old buildings were destroyed or repurposed, the surviving population had to be dealt with. Adults who remembered the old world were institutionalized as insane. Their accounts of advanced technology, different governance, and pre-reset society were labeled delusions. But the children were young enough to reprogram, remove them from their parents, erase their names, disperse them across rural America where they'd be isolated, worked into submission, and forced to forget their origins. The orphan trains weren't charity. They were the final phase of cultural erasure. The children were evidence of who came before, so they were systematically removed, renamed, and absorbed into the new timeline. 200,000 children removed, relocated, renamed, not to save them, to silence them. The orphan trains weren't about orphans. They were about erasing the last generation that remembered what came before, and they almost succeeded.